The courtroom camera captured something that would become the most replayed moment in Judge Judy history. Derek Matthews, a 28-year-old professional con artist, sat in the defendant's chair with a leather portfolio bulging with what he believed were perfect forgeries. Bank statements showing $87,000 in savings. Pay stubs from a tech company proving monthly income of $6,500. Employment verification letters on official letterhead. He had spent weeks perfecting these documents, using the same templates that had fooled 7 different landlords across 3 states. What Derek didn't know as those cameras started rolling was that Judge Judy Sheindlin would need exactly 5 seconds to spot every single lie he had carefully constructed. 5 seconds to dismantle a criminal enterprise that had stolen over $47,000 from unsuspecting victims. 5 seconds to end a scam that had been running successfully for 5 years. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Derek didn't just get caught. He didn't just lose his case. What Judge Judy did to him in those 5 seconds, and the 14 minutes that followed, was so devastatingly brutal, so forensically precise, that it became the most viral courtroom takedown in internet history. We're talking about a man who walked in thinking he was about to fool America's toughest judge on national television, only to discover that Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the moment she reviewed his case file. Every forged signature, every photoshopped number, every fake phone number was about to be exposed by a legal mind that had crushed fraudsters for 35 years. Picture this. Derek Matthews strutting into Judge Judy's courtroom like he was walking into a job interview he knew he'd already won. His 3-piece suit, purchased at Goodwill but tailored to look expensive under television lights, fit him perfectly. His hair was slicked back with expensive-looking gel. His smile was practiced and confident, the kind of smile that had charmed countless landlords into handing over keys to properties he never intended to pay for. He carried that leather portfolio like it was full of treasure, and in his mind, it was. Those documents represented his ticket to living rent-free for another 6 months while he dragged an elderly widow through the nightmare of eviction court. He had done this 7 times before, and it had worked every single time. Why would Judge Judy be any different? She was just a television judge, right? Entertainment for bored retirees watching daytime TV. He had actually bragged to his girlfriend the night before that this appearance would probably make him famous, maybe even get him some social media followers. He had no idea he was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. Derek Matthews wasn't born a criminal mastermind. He had simply figured out a system that worked and exploited it with cold calculation. At 23, after dropping out of community college and bouncing between minimum-wage jobs he despised, Derek discovered that America's rental system had a massive vulnerability. Landlords, especially small-time property owners, rarely verified employment thoroughly. They looked at documents, made phone calls to numbers listed on applications, and if everything seemed legitimate, they handed over keys. Derek realized that with a decent printer, basic Photoshop skills, and burner phones, he could create an entirely fictional professional life. His first scam was almost accidental. He had been legitimately applying for an apartment in San Diego when he got rejected for insufficient income. Frustrated and desperate, he created a fake pay stub just to see if it would work. It did. The landlord never questioned it. Derek moved in, paid the first month's rent with borrowed money, and then simply stopped paying. By the time the eviction process finally forced him out 5 months later, he had lived rent-free while the landlord struggled through California's notoriously slow court system. That first success taught Derek everything he needed to know. The system was designed to protect tenants, which meant it was incredibly difficult to quickly remove someone from a rental property even when they stopped paying. Eviction could take 4 to 8 months depending on the state, and during that entire time, the tenant could live in the property without paying a single dollar. Derek refined his approach with each new victim. He created a fake company called Tech Vision Solutions, complete with a professional website, business cards, and a phone number that forwarded to his girlfriend who played the role of HR representative. He developed templates for pay stubs that looked identical to legitimate payroll documents. He learned which banks had routing numbers that were harder to verify. He studied the psychology of landlords, figuring out exactly what they wanted to see and hear. Confident professional man with stable income and clean background. He became an expert at playing that role. By the time Derek targeted Sarah William, he had perfected his criminal enterprise into a well-oiled machine. He specifically searched for elderly landlords managing properties themselves, avoiding professional property management companies that had sophisticated verification systems. Sarah's Craigslist listing was perfect. A 67-year-old widow who had just lost her husband to cancer, trying to manage a rental property that had been her husband's pride and joy. She needed a tenant quickly because the mortgage payment was due and she was living on a fixed income. Derek could smell vulnerability from a mile away, and Sarah William represented everything he looked for in a victim. Someone kind, someone trusting, someone who desperately needed rental income and wouldn't ask too many difficult questions. He showed up to the property viewing with his fake documents already prepared, his story rehearsed, and his predatory instincts telling him this would be another easy score. Sarah William had believed she was getting a blessing when Derek Matthews walked through her door. After her husband Robert's death 2 years earlier, managing the rental property had become overwhelming. Robert had always handled tenant screening, lease agreements, and property maintenance. He had renovated that small 2-bedroom house with his own hands over 30 years, turning it from a fixer-upper into a beautiful income property that supplemented their retirement. When cancer took him at 65, Sarah inherited not just the grief of losing her partner of 40 years, but also the responsibility of being a landlord for the first time in her life. The mortgage payment was $1,850 per month, and the rental income of $1,400 barely covered it after property taxes and insurance. But it was all she had beyond her modest Social Security check of $1,100 monthly. Without that rental property, Sarah would face poverty in her retirement years. When her previous tenant moved out after 3 years, Sarah panicked. She needed someone reliable, someone who would pay on time and treat Robert's renovation work with respect. Derek had seemed like an answer to prayer. He arrived for the viewing in that impressive suit, carrying his professional-looking portfolio, speaking confidently about his career in tech sales. He complimented the property's condition, noticed the careful craftsmanship in the crown molding that Robert had installed, and even mentioned that he was looking for a stable long-term rental because he was tired of moving. Sarah's maternal instincts saw a responsible young man building a career. Derek saw an easy mark. He handed over his documents with practiced casualness, the fake pay stubs showing income that was more than adequate for the $1,400 rent, the bank statements proving he had savings for emergencies, the employment verification letter from TechVision Solutions confirming his position as regional sales director. Sarah called the phone number listed for HR verification, and a professional-sounding woman confirmed that yes, Derek Matthews had been employed there for 3 years with excellent performance reviews. What Sarah didn't know was that the woman was Derek's girlfriend reading from a script they had rehearsed dozens of times. Sarah accepted Derek's application that same day. He moved in 2 weeks later with the first month, last month, and security deposit totaling $7,200. Money he had borrowed from a predatory payday loan company, fully intending never to pay it back. The first month was perfect. Derek was quiet, respectful, even helped Sarah carry groceries from her car one afternoon when he saw her struggling. He paid the second month's rent on time with a cheerful text message. Sarah finally felt like she could breathe again, like maybe managing this property wouldn't destroy her after all. Then month 3 arrived, and Derek's mask began to slip. The rent was due on the 1st, but by the 5th, Sarah hadn't received payment. She called Derek, who answered with elaborate apologies about a payroll glitch at his company, promising the money would arrive within days. Sarah, compassionate and understanding, gave him grace. By the 15th, still no payment. Derek stopped answering her calls. Then the certified letters started arriving at Sarah's house. Legal-looking documents claiming that the property had serious habitability violations. Mold in the bathroom. Faulty electrical wiring. Broken heating system. Derek was officially notifying her that he was withholding rent until these dangerous conditions were repaired. Sarah was devastated and confused. Robert had maintained that property immaculately. She immediately hired a licensed inspector who conducted a thorough examination and found absolutely nothing wrong. No mold, no electrical issues, no heating problems. The property was in excellent condition. Derek's claims were complete fabrications. But Derek wasn't finished terrorizing her. When Sarah tried to serve him with eviction papers, he filed a counterclaim demanding $15,000 for emotional distress caused by her negligence as a landlord. He submitted more fake documents, photoshopped medical bills claiming he had developed respiratory problems from the non-existent mold, a fraudulent mold inspection report from a company that didn't exist, even fake correspondence with the county health department. Sarah's attorney explained that fighting the eviction in California court would take minimum 6 months and cost thousands in legal fees. Derek knew this. He had done it 7 times before. By month 4, Sarah had missed her first mortgage payment on the rental property. Her savings account, carefully built over decades of frugal living, was being drained by attorney fees. She stopped buying her blood pressure medication to afford the legal costs. She lay awake every night in the home she had shared with Robert, crying over what was happening to his legacy. Derek was living in that property rent-free, had changed the locks without permission, and was posting on social media about stupid landlords who didn't know tenant rights. Sarah's adult children begged her to just walk away, to let the bank foreclose and be done with it. But she couldn't. That property represented 40 years of marriage, Robert's craftsmanship, their retirement dreams. She would fight even if it destroyed her. When Sarah's attorney suggested applying to Judge Judy's television show, she initially refused. The idea of airing her pain on national television felt humiliating. But desperation changes people. The eviction court date was still 4 months away. The bank had sent a foreclosure notice. She had $847 left in savings and no way to pay next month's mortgage. Judge Judy was her last hope. She filled out the application at midnight one sleepless Tuesday, attaching every piece of evidence she had collected, the lease agreement, Derek's fake documents, the inspector's report showing no violations, bank records proving he hadn't paid rent in 6 months, photos of property damage he had caused. She wrote a heartbreaking letter explaining that she was a widow fighting to save her late husband's legacy from a con artist. Judge Judy's producers saw the application and knew immediately this would be explosive television. They accepted the case within 48 hours and began their own investigation into Derek Matthews. What they discovered was a pattern of fraud spanning 3 states and 7 victims. They forwarded everything to Judge Judy, who spent an entire evening reviewing Derek's criminal history before the taping. By the time cameras rolled, Judge Judy knew exactly what Derek was and exactly how to destroy him. Derek walked into that courtroom with supreme confidence, genuinely believing his fake documents would hold up under scrutiny. He had fooled banks, previous landlords, even some court officials. Judge Judy was just another authority figure to manipulate. Sarah walked in trembling and exhausted, praying for justice but terrified she wouldn't get it. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. And Derek Matthews was about to learn that his 5-year criminal career was over. The courtroom buzzed with its usual electric energy as Judge Judy called the session to order. The audience had settled into their seats, cameras were positioned perfectly, and the bailiff stood at attention near the defendant's table. Nobody in that room, except perhaps Judge Judy herself, had any idea they were about to witness the fastest fraud detection in television courtroom history. This was supposed to be a standard landlord-tenant dispute, the kind Judge Judy had resolved thousands of times over her legendary career. Elderly landlord claims tenant won't pay rent. Tenant claims property violations justify withholding payment. Documents get examined, truth gets revealed, judgment gets delivered. But within 5 seconds of looking at Derek Matthews' carefully forged paperwork, Judge Judy would turn this routine case into a masterclass in why you should never, ever try to con someone with 3.5 decades of legal experience. The tension in the room was palpable, though Derek remained oblivious to the danger he was in. He sat in the defendant's chair with his legs crossed casually, his expensive-looking leather portfolio resting on his lap, occasionally glancing at the cameras with a slight smile. He had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in his mind, picturing himself calmly presenting his documentation, explaining the property violations, and watching Judge Judy rule in his favor or at least reduce what he owed to nothing. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom atmosphere like a blade through butter. "Mrs. William, you're suing Mr. Matthews for $8,400 in unpaid rent plus additional damages. Is that correct?" Sarah nodded nervously, her hands clutching a folder of evidence so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Yes, Your Honor. He stopped paying rent after the second month and has been living in my property rent-free for 6 months while claiming there are violations that don't exist." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, the first sign that regular viewers recognized as her detecting something suspicious. "Before we get into the property condition, Mr. Matthews, I want to see your employment documentation. You claim you're a regional sales director earning sufficient income to afford this rent. Show me your proof." This was Derek's moment. He stood with practiced confidence, walked to the bench with measured steps that projected professionalism, and handed Judge Judy his portfolio containing the documents he had spent weeks perfecting. "Your Honor, as you'll see, I have comprehensive documentation of my employment at Tech Vision Solutions, including pay stubs for the past 6 months, bank statements showing my financial stability, and an employment verification letter from our Human Resources Department. Everything is in order. I'm a responsible tenant who was forced to withhold rent due to Mrs. Williams' negligence in maintaining a safe living environment." Judge Judy took the documents from his hands without comment. Derek returned to his seat, that confident smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. The courtroom held its collective breath as America's toughest judge looked down at the papers Derek had presented. 1 second passed as her eyes scanned the first pay stub. 2 seconds as she glanced at the bank statement header. 3 seconds as she noted the employment verification letter formatting. 4 seconds as her eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. 5 seconds as she looked up with an expression that made the camera operators instinctively zoom in because they knew something explosive was about to happen. The smile vanished from Derek's face as Judge Judy's eyes locked onto his with the intensity of a predator that had just spotted prey. "Mr. Matthews, I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me the truth about these documents. Just one." The courtroom went deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet down. Derek's practiced confidence faltered for just a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Your Honor, I don't understand what you mean. Those are my legitimate employment records from Tech Vision Solutions. Everything there is accurate and verifiable." Judge Judy's voice dropped to the deadly quiet tone that every regular viewer knew meant someone was about to be absolutely destroyed. "Mr. Matthews, these documents are fake." The word "fake" hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Derek's face cycled through confusion, then indignation, then the first hint of panic. "Excuse me. Your Honor, I don't appreciate the accusation. Those are genuine documents from my employer. If you have questions about their authenticity, you can call the HR department directly. The number is right there on the letterhead." Judge Judy leaned forward, and her next words would become one of the most replayed moments in courtroom television history. "Mr. Matthews, I don't need to call anyone. I can tell these are forgeries just by looking at them, and I'm about to explain to you and everyone watching exactly how I know you're a fraud." Derek's throat worked as he tried to swallow, his earlier confidence evaporating like water on hot pavement. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I think you're making a mistake. Maybe you should take more time to review them thoroughly before making accusations." Judge Judy's laugh was sharp and utterly without humor. "More time? I needed 5 seconds to spot a dozen different forgery indicators in your paperwork, Mr. Matthews. The fact that you thought you could walk into my courtroom with these amateur fabrications and fool me tells me everything I need to know about your intelligence level. Let me educate you about your own fraud." She held up the first pay stub, and her voice took on the tone of a professor teaching a masterclass in document forensics. "This company you claim to work for, Tech Vision Solutions. I had my research team investigate them last night. Want to know what they found? Derek's face had gone pale, but he managed to stammer out a response. It's a legitimate tech company based in Silicon Valley. They have offices in 3 states. Judge Judy's response was immediate and devastating. They don't exist, Mr. Matthews. There is no company registered in California, Nevada, or Arizona under that name. The website you created for them was registered 6 years ago to an email address that traces back to you. The phone number on this letterhead forwards to a burner phone. I know this because I had actual investigators look into your scam before you ever walked through my courtroom doors. The transformation in Derek was beginning. His shoulders hunched forward slightly, his hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his eyes darted between Judge Judy and the exit doors as if calculating whether he could simply run. But there was no escape from what was coming. Judge Judy was just getting warmed up, and she had 14 more minutes of systematic destruction planned for the man who thought he could con a widow and get away with it on national television. Sarah William watched from the plaintiff's chair with wide eyes, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. After 6 months of being told she was wrong, that she was a bad landlord, that Derek's documents proved his legitimacy, here was Judge Judy confirming in 5 seconds what Sarah had suspected all along. Derek Matthews was a liar, and his lies were about to cost him everything. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from tense to explosive as Judge Judy prepared to systematically dismantle every element of Derek's fraudulent operation. She had already declared his documents fake in those devastating first 5 seconds, and now Derek sat frozen in his chair, watching helplessly as she prepared to explain exactly how she had spotted his lies so quickly. The confident smile that had carried him through 7 previous scams was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the armrests of the defendant's chair, and a thin sheen of sweat had begun forming on his forehead despite the air-conditioned courtroom. Judge Judy wasn't just going to expose his fraud. She was going to teach him and millions of viewers exactly why his supposedly perfect forgeries were anything but perfect. She picked up the pay stub again, holding it up so the cameras could capture it clearly, and began her masterclass in document forensics that would be studied by fraud investigators for years to come. Let me walk you through exactly why these documents screamed fake the moment I looked at them, Mr. Matthews. Judge Judy's voice carried the authority of someone who had reviewed tens of thousands of legitimate documents over 3 decades. First, this pay stub uses Calibri font for the employee information, but your employment verification letter uses Times New Roman. She held up both documents side by side. No legitimate company uses inconsistent fonts across official documents. Corporate branding means everything looks the same: fonts, logos, formatting. You made these documents at different times and didn't bother checking that the fonts matched. That's amateur hour, Mr. Matthews. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Judy's raised hand stopped him cold. I'm not finished. Second, your pay stub shows federal tax withholding at 18%. But based on your claimed annual income of $78,000, you should be in the 22% bracket. Any real payroll system calculates taxes automatically using IRS tables. Yours is wrong because you guessed at a number that sounded reasonable instead of knowing actual tax law. Derek's face had progressed from pale to completely ashen. He looked like a student who had just realized he had studied for the wrong exam and there was no way to pass. Judge Judy continued her demolition without mercy. Third, this bank statement logo is pixelated when you zoom in even slightly. The bailiff noticed it from 6 feet away. Legitimate bank statements use high-resolution templates with perfect print quality. You downloaded this logo from some scam website and the image quality is terrible. I've reviewed thousands of real bank statements in my career. This looks nothing like them. She paused to let that sink in before delivering her next blow. Fourth, your dates are formatted as month-day-year, but your routing code section follows day-month-year format, which is European style. You copied templates from 2 different sources and didn't notice they contradicted each other. A real bank would never have this kind of basic formatting inconsistency. Derek tried to mount some kind of defense, his voice cracking with desperation. Your Honor, maybe there were errors in the payroll system. Maybe the bank made some mistakes with their formatting. These things happen with computer systems. Judge Judy's laugh was harsh and cutting. Computer systems? Mr. Matthews, stop insulting my intelligence and the intelligence of everyone watching. You made these documents yourself using free templates you found online and basic photo editing software. The only computer system involved was whatever laptop you used to commit fraud. But Judge Judy had saved her most devastating revelations for this moment. She opened the thick folder that her research team had compiled, and Derek's eyes went wide with sudden, sick recognition that this was about to get much worse. Mr. Matthews, let me tell you what real investigation found about your background. Not the fantasy background in your fake documents, but your actual criminal history. You're not a regional sales director for TechVision Solutions. You're a 28-year-old high school dropout who has never held a legitimate job for longer than 3 months in your entire adult life. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, but no sound came out. Judge Judy pressed forward with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. You've used this exact same scam in San Diego, Las Vegas, and Phoenix before arriving here. 7 different landlords over 5 years. The same fake company name every single time. TechVision Solutions doesn't exist and never has existed. The website was registered to your email address 6 years ago. The phone number on your fake HR letterhead forwards to a burner phone answered by your girlfriend who I understand is sitting in my courtroom gallery right now. At this revelation, heads turned toward a young woman in the 3rd row who suddenly became very interested in her shoes. Judge Judy wasn't finished destroying Derek's entire criminal enterprise on national television. Your pattern is consistent and predatory, Mr. Matthews. You specifically target elderly landlords, particularly widows managing properties for the first time. You choose people who are vulnerable, grieving, and desperate for rental income. You pass their initial screening with sophisticated forgeries that most small-time landlords don't have the resources to verify thoroughly. You move in, pay maybe 2 months' rent with borrowed money, then stop paying while you exploit the eviction process that takes months to complete. By the time you're finally forced out, you've lived rent-free for half a year while your victim drowns in legal fees and missed mortgage payments. Then you move to a new city and do it all over again. Sarah William was crying openly now, but these were tears of vindication rather than despair. Every accusation Derek had made against her, every claim that she was a negligent landlord, every piece of gaslighting that had made her doubt her own sanity, was being exposed as lies by the most respected judge in America. Judge Judy turned her attention fully back to Derek, and her voice dropped to that deadly quiet tone that meant complete annihilation was coming. You're not just a tenant who fell behind on rent, Mr. Matthews. You're a predator who has stolen over $47,000 from 8 different families. You've caused foreclosures, bankruptcies, and untold emotional devastation to people whose only crime was trusting you. And you did it all with a smile on your face and fake documents in your hand, thinking you were too smart to ever get caught. Well, congratulations. You finally found someone you couldn't con. Derek's carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. The 3-piece suit that had made him look professional now hung on him like a costume from a play that had closed early. His hands shook uncontrollably as tears began streaming down his face. The transformation from confident scammer to broken criminal was complete and captured in high definition for millions of viewers to witness. Your Honor, please, Derek's voice came out as a broken whisper. I made mistakes. I can pay her back. I just need time. I'll get a real job. I'll make this right. Judge Judy's response was immediate and without a trace of sympathy. You've had 5 years to get a real job, Mr. Matthews. Instead, you perfected a criminal enterprise. You're 28 years old and you've chosen to be a parasite instead of a productive member of society. The time for making things right ended the moment you walked into my courtroom with forged documents and lied to my face. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause despite rules about maintaining silence during proceedings. The audience couldn't contain themselves after watching Judge Judy systematically dismantle a con artist who had terrorized vulnerable people for years. Sarah William pressed both hands to her mouth, overwhelmed by the validation she had desperately needed for 6 months. Derek sat hunched over the defendant's table, his shoulders shaking with sobs, the cocky criminal who had entered the courtroom now reduced to a broken shell. Judge Judy allowed the applause to continue for several seconds before raising her hand for silence. She wasn't finished with Derek Matthews yet. There was still a judgment to deliver, criminal referrals to make, and consequences to impose that would ensure this predator never victimized another elderly widow again. The gavel was about to come down, and Derek's 5-year crime spree was about to end permanently on national television in front of millions of witnesses who would make sure his face and his crimes were never forgotten. Judge Judy's gavel came down with the finality of a guillotine blade, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like a death knell for Derek Matthews' criminal career. Mr. Matthews, judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $8,400 in unpaid rent. Her voice was cold, precise, and carried the weight of absolute authority that had made her a legend over 3 decades. Plus $3,200 for property damage you caused to Mrs. Williams' rental unit. Plus $4,200 in legal fees she was forced to pay because you weaponized the eviction process against a grieving widow. Total judgment against you, $15,800. You will pay this amount immediately through this show's settlement fund, and Mrs. William will receive her money within 48 hours. Derek's head dropped to the defendant's table with an audible thud. $15,800 he would never recover from the con that was supposed to be his easiest score yet. Sarah gasped from the plaintiff's chair, hardly believing what she was hearing. After 6 months of financial devastation, sleepless nights, and constant terror of losing everything her husband had built, justice was finally being delivered in a single moment. But Judge Judy wasn't finished with Derek Matthews. Not even close. She leaned forward with an expression that made even the camera operators tense up. Mr. Matthews, here's what else is going to happen. I am personally referring this case to the district attorney's office with a complete file of evidence my team has compiled. Derek's head snapped up, his red-rimmed eyes wide with sudden panic. These forged documents you brought into my courtroom constitute criminal fraud. That's not a civil matter, Mr. Matthews. That's a felony. Your pattern of behavior across California, Nevada, and Arizona constitutes wire fraud because you used electronic communications and interstate commerce to perpetrate your scams. Wire fraud is a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison. The courtroom went completely silent. Even Sarah stopped crying, shocked by the magnitude of what Judge Judy was revealing. You thought you were smart, Derek. You thought you had figured out a foolproof system. But federal prosecutors love cases with clear evidence, multiple victims, and a documented pattern of predatory behavior. You've just handed them a gift-wrapped conviction on national television. Derek tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. Judge Judy continued without mercy. I've already had my production team contact your 7 previous victims. They're all willing to testify. They all have evidence. And now you've committed fraud on camera in front of millions of witnesses with documents that will be Exhibit A in your federal trial. Get out of my courtroom, Judge Judy said, her voice carrying utter contempt. Mrs. William, you're getting your property back immediately, and this parasite will never darken your doorstep again. Court is dismissed. The gavel came down one final time with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The bailiff moved forward to escort Derek out, but he could barely stand. His legs shook as he tried to gather the fake documents scattered across the defendant's table, but his hands were trembling so badly that papers fell to the floor. As he stumbled toward the exit, members of the courtroom audience actually booed, something that never happened in Judge Judy's courtroom. But this case was different. This wasn't just about a contract dispute or a minor disagreement. This was about a predator who had terrorized vulnerable people for years finally getting destroyed on national television. Sarah remained in the plaintiff's chair, her hands pressed against her mouth, tears flowing freely down her weathered face. Judge Judy caught her eye and nodded once, a small gesture of solidarity between two women who understood what real strength looked like. Sarah mouthed the words, "Thank you," and Judge Judy's stern expression softened for just a moment before returning to her professional demeanor as production staff signaled the end of taping. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across every social media platform with the force of a cultural earthquake. The moment Judge Judy held up Derek's documents and said, "These documents are fake," hit 5 million views on YouTube before the show had even finished its East Coast broadcast. The hashtag 5 Seconds to Justice began trending on Twitter within 30 minutes, with hundreds of thousands of people sharing their own stories of being scammed by fake tenants or landlords. Facebook groups dedicated to rental property management shared the video over 200,000 times in the first 24 hours. Comments flooded in from around the world. "This is why Judge Judy is a living legend. The way she destroyed those fake documents in literally 5 seconds, I replayed it 10 times. Every landlord in America needs to watch this before accepting another rental application." Derek thought he was smart, but Judge Judy is on another level entirely. TikTok creators made reaction videos that collectively garnered over 30 million views, with younger audiences discovering Judge Judy's legendary abilities for the first time. Instagram Reels showed the moment of Derek's breakdown with captions like, "Watch this scammer's soul leave his body," and 5 seconds that ended a criminal career. But the viral impact was just the beginning of Derek's nightmare. Federal prosecutors in the Central District of California took Judge Judy's referral seriously, and within 3 weeks, Derek Matthews was indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His girlfriend, who had played the role of HR representative for TechVision Solutions, initially faced charges as an accomplice but received immunity in exchange for testifying against Derek and providing evidence of their entire operation. All 7 of Derek's previous victims were contacted by federal investigators and agreed to participate in the prosecution. The case was airtight. Derek's own appearance on Judge Judy, where he had brought fake documents and lied under oath on camera, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's evidence. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea bargain, but prosecutors were uninterested. This was exactly the kind of case that sent a message to other would-be scammers: fraud has consequences. Derek was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk given his established pattern of moving between states to avoid consequences. He sat in federal detention awaiting trial, facing a minimum of 15 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Sarah Williams' life transformed in the opposite direction. She received the $15,800 settlement within 48 hours, exactly as Judge Judy had promised. She immediately caught up on all missed mortgage payments, paid off the predatory loan sharks who had been harassing her, and restocked her prescription medications. But the financial relief was only part of her recovery. The Judge Judy segment had gone so viral that a GoFundMe campaign started by viewers who were moved by her story raised an additional $23,000 within 1 week. Sarah used the money to hire a professional property management company to handle all future tenant screening and lease management. She would never have to face another Derek Matthews alone. Local news stations interviewed her, and she became an advocate for elderly landlords, speaking at community centers about the warning signs of rental scams. Property management companies across the country began using the Judge Judy clip in their training seminars, teaching new employees how to spot forged documents. Technology companies developed apps specifically designed to verify employment and bank statements in real time, citing Derek's case as the inspiration. Landlord advocacy groups added document forensics to their educational materials, pointing out the exact tells that Judge Judy had identified: font inconsistencies, incorrect tax withholding calculations, pixelated logos, formatting errors. The case became a landmark moment not just in television history but in the broader conversation about tenant fraud and the vulnerabilities in America's rental system. Legal experts analyzed Judge Judy's methodical destruction of Derek's forgeries in law school classes about evidence and fraud detection. Communication scholars studied the video as a perfect example of how authority, expertise, and moral clarity can create viral content that resonates across demographics. But perhaps the most profound impact was on other families facing similar situations. Hundreds of landlords reached out to Sarah through social media, sharing their own stories of being victimized by professional tenant scammers. Support networks formed online where property owners could share warning signs, verify suspicious applications, and support each other through the lengthy eviction process. Sarah became an unexpected leader in this community, her courage in standing up to Derek inspiring others to fight back against predatory tenants instead of simply walking away in defeat. 6 months after his humiliation on national television, Derek Matthews sat in a federal courtroom as a jury deliberated his fate. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. His own appearance on Judge Judy played on a large screen for jurors who watched his confident lies transform into panicked confession in real time. The jury took less than 4 hours to return guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. Derek was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 12 years. The judge, in delivering the sentence, specifically cited Judge Judy's investigation as the catalyst that had finally stopped a predator who might have continued victimizing elderly widows for decades. This story isn't just about one con artist getting caught. It's about the power of expertise to cut through deception in seconds. It's about accountability finally catching up with someone who had exploited compassion and legal loopholes for years. It's about an elderly widow refusing to give up on her late husband's legacy even when the system seemed designed to protect her abuser. And it's about Judge Judy Sheindlin doing what she has done for 35 years, delivering justice with precision, authority, and zero tolerance for people who prey on the vulnerable. Derek Matthews thought he was smart enough to fool everyone. He had fooled banks, background check companies, and 7 previous landlords. But he learned what thousands of liars, scammers, and fraudsters had learned before him: you cannot fool Judge Judy. 5 seconds was all she needed to see through years of carefully constructed lies. 5 seconds to end a criminal career. 5 seconds that restored one widow's faith in justice and reminded millions of viewers why Judge Judy remains the undisputed queen of the courtroom. If you believe Derek got exactly what he deserved, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with anyone who needs to see what happens when scammers think they're smarter than the system. Comment below with your thoughts on tenant fraud and whether 18 years was enough punishment for someone who terrorized 8 families. And remember, in Judge Judy's courtroom, fake documents don't just get you embarrassed. They get you destroyed, exposed, and prosecuted. Justice isn't just blind. Sometimes it only needs 5 seconds to see the truth.